Welcome to Lesson 12, Secondary Tenses and the Imperfect Indicative. Please turn in your handbook to page 47 and follow along. First of all, we have an overview of the secondary tenses. Greek has three secondary tenses: the imperfect, the aorist, and the pluperfect. Here's our Greek verb map that we looked at. I've been looking at. Notice that the imperfect is a line indicating ongoing action. The aorist views the action as a whole, simple or undefined action, and the pluperfect is completed action with results that continued for a time in the past but do not apparently continue up to the present time. Now, the key thing about secondary tenses is that they are all past tenses. So the imperfect is ongoing action in the past, the aorist is action viewed as a whole in the past, and the pluperfect is completed action with ongoing results in the past. Okay? As the textbook indicates, the aorist is simple past. The imperfect expresses the past with continual action. Here in the middle of page 47, you see the secondary active endings. We've learned the primary active endings were o, is, e, omen, ete, usi. Now, secondary verbs have secondary active endings, and here they are. Nu is the first person singular. Sigma is the second person singular. There is no third person ending in the third singular, so that's what the blank is for. Men is the first plural, te the second plural, and nu or son, depending on which tense we're talking with, is the third person plural ending. So, coming back to this Greek verb map, these endings that we just went through, nu, sigma, blank, men, te, nu, or son, apply to the three different active endings of the three different tenses. The secondary middle passive endings are listed for you here toward the bottom of 47, and they are main, so, to, metha, estha, ndo. Notice footnote 23. In all but a few forms, which will be learned later, this ending appears in a modified form as u or o. Okay? So the middle passive forms main, so, to, metha, estha, nto apply to the middle passive imperfects, the aorist middle, and the pluperfect middle passive. As the textbook indicates, we won't be doing anything with the pluperfect in this course because it occurs so infrequently. Coming back to page 47 at the bottom, we have a section on augments. The imperfect tense and every other secondary tense in the indicative mood has an augment. The augment is a sign of past time and occurs only in the indicative mood. Okay, that's crucial. You need to know that the augment is a sign of past time. Going on to top of page 48, we get a description of when verbs or how verbs receive their augments. Verbs that begin with a consonant receive an epsilon augment. So here's examples of that. Luo, valo, meno, and krino all take the epsilon augment at the beginning of the verb stem, and as a result, the epsilon augment is the way to tell that those are past time verbs. Number 2, for verbs beginning with a vowel, that vowel is lengthened. So A and B indicate A says that initial alpha lengthens to an eta. If the verb begins with a diphthong, alpha iota or epsilon iota, its normal augmented form is eta with an iota subscript. Epsilon upsilon becomes eta upsilon, and omicron becomes omega iota subscript. So here are examples. Agapao, the alpha, lengthens to an eta. In the imperfect, the epsilon lengthens to an eta. the alpha lengthens to an eta, and the alpha iota lengthens to an eta iota subscript. Finally, with compound verbs, the augment occurs after the preposition. So if a preposition ends with a vowel, that vowel usually drops out before the augment. So for example, here's a compound verb, ek valo, to cast out, and the imperfect form is ex evalon. What's happened here is the kappa has changed to a xi when we added the epsilon in between. Apothnesko becomes apethneskon. So the omicron, which ended the preposition apo, dropped out and the epsilon replaced it. Apostello, again the omicron drops out, the epsilon is put in its place. And prosevchome, I am praying. The pros stays the same, and instead the ev augment, the ev prefix, just like this, becomes eta upsilon. Prosevchomein. Prosevchomein. So, in recap, verbs that begin with consonants add an epsilon augment. That's the most common and the most frequent. Verbs that begin with a vowel, that vowel lengthens according to the rules listed here. And in compound verbs, the augment occurs after the preposition. And that's the coverage for the basic information about secondary tenses, and that brings us to the imperfect tense specifically. Again, the imperfect tense indicates ongoing action in the past. And the imperfect tense adds the augment to the stem, a connecting vowel, and then the secondary endings. So the formula for the imperfect active is augment plus the present stem plus the connecting vowel plus the secondary active endings. That is an epsilon augment plus, for example, luo, the present stem, the connecting vowel, omicron or epsilon. Omicron if the ending is a nu or a mu, epsilon if it's anything else, and that gives you the endings eluon, elus, eluen. Eluomen, elueta, eluon. I was loosing, you were loosing, he was loosing. Eluon, I was loosing. Elus, you were loosing. Elua, he was loosing. Eluomen, we were loosing. Elueta, you were loosing. Eluon, they were loosing. Now perhaps you've noticed that they were loosing and I was loosing are identical in form. Context will be the way that you tell the difference. Moving on to page 49, at the top you see the imperfect middle passive indicative forms. So since it's both, the form can be either middle or passive, we get both a middle translation and a passive translation, and you'd have to depend on context to know which was intended. So the endings are main, so, to, metha, esta, nto, and as the textbook noted, so often becomes an omicron upsilon. So elu omein, I was loosing for myself, or I was being loosed. Eluu, you were loosing for yourself, or you were being loosed. Elueto, he was loosing for himself, he was being loosed. Eluometha, we were loosing for ourselves, or we were being loosed. Eluesthe, you were loosing for yourselves, or you were being loosed. Eluondo, they were loosing for themselves, they were being loosed. And that's it for the imperfect forms. The past form of imi, which I think I've taught you most of this, but here it is in a chart form. I was is amen. You were ace. 2 times in the New Testament, aestha. 6 times ace, so ace is 3 times more common. Ain. He was, it was, she was. Amen, we were. Eta, you were. Ason, they were. And that's all there is for Lesson 12. You do need to know the vocabulary, and I'll pronounce that for you now. Ero, apoktino, eos, thelema, thelematos, lipo, meta, olos, orao, oude, 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 outos, palin, pous, podos, tota, uper. That's it for Lesson 12.